Hiroshima too. The same I did to them, baby, I can do to you. Cause I'm a Fujiyama Mama and I'm just about...
This lyrically and musically daring recording is in reference to the 1945 atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing an estimated 140,000 and 74,000 people respectively. Survivors would face leukemia, cancer, or other terrible side effects from the radiation, such as extreme burns to the body. With an offbeat lyric about a tragedy like this, how did this become the #1 song in Japan?
Make me stop.
One way to look at this question could be through an ethnomusicological lens. At a broad level, ethnomusicology is a multidisciplinary study of music and its social and cultural context, aiming to study the importance of all types of music throughout every culture and society globally. So basically, the study of music of different cultures. Ethnomusicologists examine music as a social process to understand what music is and what it means to its practitioners and audiences. For example, let's take a look at the Black Eyed Peas song, Where's the Love, and how it lyrically reflects the culture at the time.
Overseas, yeah, we trying to stop terrorism, but we still got terrorists here living in the USA, the big CIA, the Bloods and the Crips and the KKK.
In an MTV interview, will.i.am described writing the song in 2001 in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks and ongoing issues. It was a way for him to get socially conscious thoughts off of his chest that he had been holding in. The lyrics discuss many issues such as terrorism, US government hypocrisy, gang violence, and racism, providing insight into the social and cultural context of the artist's perspective. Drawing comparisons from Where's the Love, the Black Eyed Peas released Big Love in 2018 with a similarly strong political stance reflecting a more modern era.
Kids on the Percocet, tripping on the medicine. Call it like I see it, we some drugged up Americans. Everybody's following, ain't nobody leading. People loving guns more than kids is the season.
And that popular music, from hip-hop to punk rock and beyond, has a profound power to spark real social change.
So what if we examine the perspective of some musical artists from the Cold War era? First, let's set the scene.
We interrupt our normal program to cooperate in security and civil defense measures as normal broadcasting will now be discontinued. I repeat, normal broadcasting will be discontinued for an indefinite period.
Civil defense, an American tradition.
You have a family survival plan?
What is this fallout, anyhow?
On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy on Hiroshima. 70% of all buildings were destroyed, killing an estimated 140,000 people by the end of the year. Just days later, on August 9th, the US would go on to drop another atomic bomb, the Fat Man, on Nagasaki, killing roughly 74,000 by the end of the year. The Fat Man bombed level 6.7 square kilometers of the city as ground temperatures reached 4,000 degrees Celsius and radioactive rain poured down. In Hiroshima, up to 90% of physicians and nurses were killed or injured, and 42 of 45 hospitals were rendered non-functional. This left many surviving victims to die without any care to ease their suffering. Aid that attempted to enter what remained of the cities would instead end up dying themselves due to the exposure from lingering radiation. Those who survived would go on to face lifelong chronic diseases, leukemia, cancer, and other terrible side effects from the radiation. The atomic bombings, coupled with the Soviet Union's declaration of war on Japan, convinced Emperor Hirohito of Japan to surrender, effectively ending World War II in the same year. During this time, some of the earliest atomic songs would be produced, often incorporating themes of patriotism, revenge, and the divine origin of atomic power.
You remember two great cities in a distant foreign land, when scorched from the face of earth their power of Japan.
And a great ball of light filled the Japanese with fright. They must have thought it was their judgment day.
After World War II, the US and the Soviet Union found themselves on opposing sides of a Cold War, pitting the democratic US against the communist Soviet Union. In 1947, President Truman went on to establish the Truman Doctrine, which stated that the US would provide political, military, and economic assistance to all democratic nations under threat from external or internal authoritarian forces. Truman declared that it must be policy of the United States to support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures as an attempt to contain communism, a motive that would dictate most U.S. actions throughout the Cold War. Truman would also authorize a loyalty oath program for government employees, issuing an executive order that granted HUAC, also known as the House Un-American Activities Committee, the power to institute investigations of anybody suspected of communist affiliations or sympathies. Amidst fears of Soviet communist influence, HUAC would begin investigating and enforcing blacklists for anybody deemed suspicious of communist activities, such as the Hollywood 10. They were a group of artists who were blacklisted for refusing to cooperate with hearings held by HUAC in 1947. When asked, "Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" 10 people refused to testify, stating that the First Amendment granted them the freedom of speech and the freedom of association. This resulted in the artists being fired from Hollywood film studios, blacklisted, and imprisoned, exemplifying the fate of anybody who refused to cooperate with HUAC's accusatory investigations. HUAC's targets would regularly consist of government employees, labor union members, film industry figures, members of the scientific community, and more. Just being called to testify before the committee would be sufficient enough to have an innocent citizen blacklisted from their profession with permanent consequences. HUAC's power, and the US's rationale for an unprecedented arms buildup, was only fueled further by China's collapse to the Communist Revolution and the Soviet Union's first successful nuclear bomb test in 1949. This was aided by Russian spies who stole information and plans from the Manhattan Project, a top-secret World War II government program dedicated to developing and deploying the world's first atomic weapons. This resulted in more paranoia and fear that plagued the American public. In response, President Truman announced that the US would build an even more destructive atomic weapon, the hydrogen bomb. This began the deadly arms race and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation impacting American domestic life. This led to an era of nuclear uncertainty, public paranoia, and fear. An era filled with stories of communist infiltration, spies, and traitors in American newspapers. An era known as the Red Scare. Arguably, the most infamous claim about the communist infiltration spawned from Wisconsin Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy. In February of 1950, McCarthy claimed he had a list of 205 names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department. Just 3 days later, this list of card-carrying members of the Communist Party shrunk to 57 names. Shortly after, the list grew to a total of 81 members considered loyalty risk, changing his original statement that it was a list of people with communist connections instead. But the fact of the matter was, McCarthy had no evidence and he just enjoyed waving the list in front of the cameras. A 313-page majority report from July 1950 stated that McCarthy's accusations were perhaps the most nefarious campaign of half-truths and untruth in the history of this republic. Yet, McCarthy would go on to be awarded the chairmanship of the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee and the Committee on Government Operations, overseeing U.S. security concerns and beginning an era of McCarthyism. McCarthyism was a term coined to describe the practice of publicizing accusations of political disloyalty or subversion with insufficient regard to evidence, and the use of unfair investigatory and accusatory methods in order to suppress opposition. McCarthyism was also described as the practice of accusing federal government employees of having affiliations with communism and leaking information, resulting in government employees becoming blacklisted and losing their jobs. While these government committees were allegedly intended to enhance America's security against the communist threat, McCarthy and his aides could not document a single concrete example of an individual who threatened the United States. A notable example of McCarthy's toxic machinations that polluted the American political culture was the banning of American composer Andrew Copland's classical piece, A Lincoln Portrait. Like many citizens who were deemed suspicious without a legitimate cause, Copland was ordered to appear before McCarthy's committee. Republican Congressman Fred Busby, who admitted to knowing little about music, condemned Copland's piece as it seemed to be more in interest of an alien ideology than the things representative of Abraham Lincoln. Despite Busby's claims, the piece was an overtly patriotic composition that was composed during World War II. The classical orchestra piece, accompanied by a narrator who read excerpts of Abraham Lincoln's great documents, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1945 and scheduled to be performed for Dwight Eisenhower's 1953 presidential inauguration. But due to the Red Scare inflamed further by McCarthyism, Copland was blacklisted and his music was no longer to be played at the inauguration. The Lincoln Portrait was banned because of Copland's leftist views and accusations that his music aligned more with communist ideologies. In an 85-1 vote, McCarthy was awarded $214,000 in funding for his subcommittee's investigation in 1954, as his political strength and absurd claims only increased in power. The New York Times would report that he was one of the most powerful and feared men in the United States Senate, as he continued bullying his opponents through exaggerations, distortions, and outright lies. These acts were repeatedly exposed by a CBS journalist, Edward R. Murrow, who would investigate and disprove his numerous claims. As expected, McCarthy would also claim that Murrow was the leader and the cleverest of the jackal pack of communists and traitors.
Joe, come here a minute. I got a red hot tip for you, Joe.
But in April of 1954, McCarthy's political career would drastically spiral downwards after he attempted to investigate the United States Army. He claimed that communist agents had infiltrated the Army Signal Corps, sparring with the Army legal team for 36 days on televised cameras.
Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
During the Army McCarthy hearings in Congress, McCarthy's approval ratings dropped from 50% to 32%, and only 35% of Americans held a favorable view of him, with 49% holding an unfavorable view. By December, he was censured by the Senate for obstructing constitutional processes and losing control of key committee assignments, a deserved punishment for his reckless crusade. 2 years later, he passed away from hepatitis, although many historians speculated that his death was caused by his alcoholism.
Get that communist job!
Alert today, alive tomorrow.
Plan now with your family for civil defense emergency action. Someday it may save your lives.
You are the target of those who would trample the liberties of free men. You are in the crosshairs of the bomb sight. An enemy is centering on you. You are a citizen of the free world, a citizen of the United States of America. This is the plan to help you and others who need you, a plan to live, to work, and fight as did your forefathers. Evacuation from target areas is our best assurance of survival. You know the Conrad radio alert may be the first warning of enemy attack. Prepare to take shelter. Check. Your battery radio and your auto radio have the Conrad stations clearly marked at 640 and 1240.
A 1954 study was conducted that discovered only 4% of households knew the emergency dial settings on their radio, being the 640 and 1240 KC dial settings that would broadcast emergency messages.
Civil defense information will be broadcast in most areas at 640 and 1240 on your regular radio receiver.
Conducted by Alfred Pulitz Research Incorporated, the study interviewed 11,020 households to discover that not many people were familiar with Conrad.
Go away.
Won't take but a moment.
This stood for the control of electromagnetic radiation, an emergency broadcasting method that would go active in the event of an enemy attack within the United States.
Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying.
Electromagnetic radiation. Sounds pretty complicated if you're not an electronic engineer, and yet all you have to do is dial your AM radio to 640 or 1240 in the event of an enemy air attack. And thanks to Conrad, you will continue to receive official information.
This served as a precursor to the emergency broadcast system. This same study found that out of 94.7% of households who had a radio, only 94.1% had no dial marked with the 640-1240 KC settings. Furthermore, 82.3% of households did not know what Conrad's plans were for radio usage. Because of these findings, the FCDA would begin distributing Conrad kits to radio and TV stations, including print announcements, 2 short films, and 2 radio scripts that would describe the devastation of an atomic attack and the need for Conrad. Despite these efforts, Conrad was plagued with problems, such as requiring radio stations to invest in updated equipment in order to even participate in this voluntary project. Conrad would even disable radio and television broadcasting to test emergency drills, resulting in lost revenue for these stations.
Civil defense is common sense. This is Howard Duff with this reminder, 640 and 1240.
Civil defense is common sense. This is Pat Boone.
Civil defense is common sense. This is Joni James.
Listen and learn through civil defense. This is Johnny Cash.
Civil defense is common sense. Hi, this is Tony Bennett. Make sure you're prepared if a nuclear attack ever comes.
Tests have shown that the best protection against fallout is an underground shelter.
When a mushroom cloud has changed every rule, it's deep in our thinking at home and at school. Please, 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 where did you go?
During this period, many radio personalities and celebrities participated in civil defense messages and promotion campaigns. They emphasized what to do in the event and the aftermath of an atomic bomb, explained how to build DIY fallout shelters, and gave their full support to these emergency plans. In one instance, radio DJ Flown Weinreiter locked himself and his 3 teenage children inside an atomic fallout shelter for 7 days and nights in 1959. During their voluntary exile, Weinreiter wanted to prove to listeners of KALL Salt Lake City that life inside of the shelter was bearable and even interesting. They survived off of emergency food rations recommended by Utah Civil Defense, further promoting civil defense's agenda. Interestingly enough, this proved to be quite successful, as Leo Hogue, the National Director of Civil Defense, thanked the Weinreiters for proving to the country the need for home atomic fallout shelters and demonstrating their practicability. This led to a trend where radio hosts and DJs would lock themselves inside fallout shelters and live off emergency rations for roughly a week. In one case, 2 DJs from WORD Spartanburg, South Carolina, locked themselves into a civil defense-approved fallout shelter and agreed to stay locked in there until $2,500 was raised for their Spartanburg County, which is roughly $25,000 in today's value.
Yellow and black. Oh, I see them everywhere. What does it mean? Am I losing my mind?
Mrs. Edwards, my professional diagnosis is quite simple.
Oh, thank you, doctor.
What you have been seeing everywhere you look are those yellow and black signs installed by Civil Defense.
During this era, the average United States citizen was exposed to some form or another of the Cold War's impact on their day-to-day life, such as the news, the overarching anxieties of the Cold War and communism, the paranoia and accusation of spies and being a communist, countless civil defense pamphlets, or the general fear of being annihilated in an atomic attack. The lifestyle of the 1950s and 60s inspired an epidemic of popular films that would depict nuclear devastation and mutant creatures, such as 1954's Godzilla and Kubrick's satirical Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb from 1964. Returning to the ethnomusicological lens, we can see how the social and cultural contexts of this era are reflected in their music too, resulting in a range of music thematic of the Cold War or the atom bomb. According to authors Bill Geerhart and Ken Sitz, some tunes were celebratory, some were fearful, some were vindictive, some were sexual, and many were downright ridiculous. This is from their book, Atomic Platters, which is accompanied by a collection of over 100 Cold War songs and a dozen of civil defense public service announcements that were used throughout this project.
Heads up, America, let's stand prepared with our defenses high.
A common theme among these songs was patriotism, often coinciding with religious and political values that would call upon Americans to be brave, proud, religious, and pro-democracy. This is to be expected, as patriotism is most fervently displayed in times of war and impending war. So much so that even acts of patriotism in times of peace typically commemorate wars and the military. When analyzing these songs, the most patriotic tunes tended to be country and folk music, as country historically holds militaristic and patriotic themes. The genre is often perceived as patriotic, which made it all the more attractive for consumption to a lot of people who align themselves with these values.
You will see the lightning flashing, hear atomic thunders roll. When Moscow lies in ashes, God have mercy on your soul.
These country songs often share militaristic messages, such as battling in the Cold War, using atomic weapons, and ultimately defeating communism in the name of democracy.
There will soon be an end to this cold and wicked war when those hard-headed communists get what they're looking for.
Many of these country songs held overt religious values, often comparing communism to a devilish evil. Songs range from claiming that the atomic bomb was a divine power from God,
in that 0 hour, seeking out some heavenly power while the Star-Spangled Banner was being played,
to encouraging listeners to return to prayer as it may be their only saving grace from when the atom bombs go off.
So you'd better brush the dust from that old Bible and look up to the stars when they shine.
Expanding on religious themes, gospel music would also share similar metaphors of the atomic divinity. The Swan Silvertone singers compared Jesus to being God's atomic bomb.
Jesus is God, atomic bomb, atomic bomb, atomic bomb, greatest power, atomic bomb, that ever was, atomic bomb.
While the Spirit of Memphis Quartet repeated this theme of divine atomic nexus, stating that God gave us this atomic energy to be used for the betterment of mankind, warning that some people may use it for destruction.
God have given us a great new power, for to use for the good of all mankind.
As mentioned previously, political themes were prominent throughout this era of atomic music, often coinciding with patriotic values and being fervently anti-communist. For example, there were celebratory tunes to dishonor the deceased Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, like Buddy Hawk and his buddies' The Death of Joe Stalin, Good Riddance, and Ray Anderson's Stalin Kicked the Bucket. Many of these political songs were often parodies or satirical works that would poke fun at Russians and communist political figures.
In Russia, almost everybody watches Russian bandstand.
Now everybody watches Russian bandstand.
But some other songs were also critical of the US during this time, such as Carson Robinson condemning communism with I'm No Communist, but also equally criticizing the US as being out of control with taxes skyrocketing and a monster-sized national debt.
Unless we stop inflation and take care of what we've got, the communists may win the fight and never fire a shot.
This era also brought many novelty songs. These were typically satirical songs that were written and performed as a novelty, such as a gimmick, a piece of humor, or a sample of pop culture, like a modern-day meme. In this context, these were often thematic of the current ongoing politics, such as the witch hunts and blacklists of the McCarthyism era.
Joe, come here a minute. I got a red hot tip for you, Joe.
Or the media sensation of when Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, toured the United States in 1959.
I pulled up beside him and I heard him say, "It's good to find country here in USA."
With the world on the brink of war, nuclear catastrophe, and mass death, it's only fitting that teenage death songs were popularized during the late 1950s and early 1960s, as noted by pop culture historians and music scholars. Splatter Platters and Death Disc dealt with morbid themes of mortality, reflecting significant events in pop culture history. Among these were actor James Dean's death at 24 in 1955, and the day the music died in 1959 when a plane crash resulted in the deaths of Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper. These dire yet catchy songs about train accidents, car wrecks, and double suicides channeled the atomic angst of America's youth into mainstream hit singles.
But even though you are a teenage Russian spy, Agnes, my Agnes, I love you till you die.
There's a mushroom cloud that hangs in the way. Tomorrow looks black, so we live for today. Peace, 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 where did you go?
You hold my hand, I understand. The sickness has begun. And if we live or if we die, our hearts will be as one.
Other novelty songs often incorporated more thematic elements into a catchy beat with the rise of rockabilly and rock and roll music.
When you hear the missile whistle, you gotta roll and rock. Come on, baby, everyone doing the bam-bam.
Yes, this is my fallout film, with its on a kiss, yeah. So we'll hold up together in the shelter of eternal bliss.
Come on, baby, listen to me. That rock and roll Adam's getting through to me. That rock and roll Adam's getting through to me.
There was also a rise in more promiscuous music sharing these explosive themes. These were known as atomic sex songs, such as Billy Haley and his comments, 13 women and only one man in town.
There was 13 women and only one man in town. 13 women and only one man in town.
The song describes a post-nuclear holocaust where 13 women catered to the needs of the only man who survived in the town, filled with risque lyrics and a creeping beat. These songs reflected legitimate anxieties of Americans at the time, how sexual chaos could run rampant in response to atomic bombs going off. An executive director of the American Social Hygiene Association even published an article in 1951 that predicted moral standards would relax and promiscuity would increase in response to an atomic attack, resulting in an estimated 1,000% increase in venereal diseases. Despite this, there was still a booming rise in female sexuality. Dinah Shore would go on to cover 13 Women and Only One Man in Town in 1958, along with Anne Margaret a few years later, reversing the role so that the men catered to her in this atomic sex song.
tin man every morning. I seen that I was well fed, and believe you me, one sweetened my tea while the other one buttered my bread.
During this time, Fujiyama Mama hit the unprepared listener like a concussive device when lyrics compared the atomic bombing atrocities of Japan to that of the unpredictable sexual voraciousness of Wanda Jackson.
Because I'm a Fujiyama Mama and I'm just about to blow my top. Fujiyama Yama, Fujiyama.
Ironically, the song became the #1 song in Japan for 6 months straight, with Jackson even being treated as a dignitary during her brief 1959 tour in Japan. The song was not a hit in the US, yet somehow became a nationwide, chart-topping hit in Japan of all places during the generation following the devastation of war just 14 years earlier. Sexually charged lyrics from a rebellious and empowered woman put off Americans, as it went against the hegemonic norm of this politically and culturally conservative period. As for why the song was successful in Japan, rockabilly historian Craig Morrison proposed that Japanese listeners were happier about the local place names Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Fujiyama than the memory of wartime destruction. This is also partly because these cities may have been the only lyrics Japanese audiences understood. But more recently, Asian Studies professor Christopher T. Keaveney argued that the song's success can be attributed to the embodiment of the desire for female empowerment in post-war Japan and the rise of rockabilly in the post-war generation. From 1955 to 1965, high school student populations grew from 2.6 million to 5 million in Japan. In the same time span, college students grew from 600,000 to over 1 million. With such a large population of young people coming of age and finding a voice, the post-war generation was becoming drenched in American pop culture.
Replicas of American institutions enabled them to learn something of its government,
instilling Japan to Western democratic ideals.
The communists here are not strong, but they are noisy. They have tried to undermine Japan's security by promoting hatred of Americans. Their campaign has harvested violence, bitter demonstrations of mob passion whose purpose was to drive a wedge between the Japanese and American peoples.
The rise of rockabilly intertwined with the Orientalism of Japan, forming what has been coined as GI songs, or Shinchugun Sangu. These were songs in the 1950s composed for American GIs stationed in post-war Japan, typically written by American servicemen and Japanese songwriters. These songs were musical exotizations of Japan, meaning that this music was a representation of Japan depicted from the perspective of American composers. Fujiyama Mama became one of the best-known GI songs when it topped the 1958 charts in Japan at #1, yet it was a cover of a song recorded originally by Ernestine Allen in 1955. The song was composed by Earl Solomon Burroughs, an African-American singer-songwriter and World War II veteran, better known by his alias Jackhammer. He wrote the song from the perspective of a pan-pan girl or geisha girl who mingled with the American GIs in post-war Japan. The woman is ignited by an explosive passion from being wronged by her unfaithful Western lover, with metaphors comparing her to the atomic bombings of Japan. Despite these lyrics, Japanese audiences still recovering from the horrors of war perceive the song as female empowerment, and by extension, empowerment of a post-war Japan capable of asserting itself. Wanda Jackson's performance only aided this, as Jackson herself embodied this female empowerment promised by the post-war Constitution, despite the lyrics being totally constructed by and for the American male gaze. As a widely recognized sex symbol, Geerhart argues that Jackson inadvertently appropriated the sexual allure of an Oriental woman. This reflects the long-standing Orientalist view of the sexually submissive Asian woman and the dominance of the Japanese sex industry by American GIs post-World War II. Wanda Jackson toured Japan with Japanese promoters pursuing photo shoots of her engaging in traditional feminine pursuits, such as playing the koto, flower arranging, dressing in a kimono, and introducing her to geisha. It is an undeniably complex explanation of how the Japanese public embraced this song after such tragedies. But the rise of rockabilly would only continue in Japan well into the 1960s. America transformed during the Cold War and the Red Scare, from living in paranoia of communist infiltrations and accusations to the fear of atomic bombings and building fallout shelters. These legitimate fears and anxieties would manifest themselves through the song artists of this generation, creating atomic angst, bomb bops, political fallout, atomic sex songs, and more. These songs not only influenced Americans, but also resonated across the seas in Japan.
I adore being dressed in something frilly when my date comes to get me at my place.
Where they topped charts amidst the rise of rockabilly, blending Orientalism with Western ideals. The intertwining of cultural influences between America and Japan during the tumultuous Cold War era not only fueled the rise of rockabilly in both nations, but also gave voice to the profound societal fears and anxieties, shaping a unique musical landscape that resonated globally for years to come.
Guided missiles aimed at my heart, bound to destroy me, tear me apart. Guided kisses, none of them true. Now I know the enemy is you. Guided missiles.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, it truly means a lot. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you found interesting, or if there are any bomb bops that you know of. A big inspiration for this project was playing the Fallout games and enjoying all the atomic hits that played, like Crawl Out Through the Fallout by Sheldon Allman. Thank you again, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.